Welcome everyone. Today I am going to speak on practical KPIs or key performance indicators for an IVF clinic. Once you open up an IVF unit, the most important task for you is to deliver results, that is IVF pregnancies. Once you start delivering the result, the next most important task is to now continuously perform at this level and maintain this level of performance. And that is where KPIs or key performance indicators come into picture. KPIs cover all the important IVF processes within your clinic, and when you monitor all these processes and operate at a competency and benchmark level, that is when you consistently deliver results. My name is Duel Bose Pandey and I am an IVF Lab Director at Indore Fertility Clinic, and today I will be taking you through what are the practical KPIs for an IVF unit. But before that, when it comes to KPIs, we all have a general feel that KPIs are not very important, that they are secondary to our core competency. And I went ahead and I collected some data from various webinars and various online sessions, and even spoke to some of my peer group members. And this is the general feeling that we have as IVF practitioners. So, as a group of embryologists, many of them think that it is too much of paperwork without being paid for. We believe that it is not our core competency. We also believe that it is way for managers or directors to intervene and annoy us. And many believe that it is fluff or a new name for the same old troubleshooting problems. And the general gut feel was it is useless and it really doesn't add on to the embryology skill set. However, the clinicians who, mind you, are in India, most of the IVF clinics are owned by clinicians. So when you ask clinicians about KPIs, they think it is important, but they believe that we need to only measure the IVF Lab KPIs. Clinical KPIs they think are useless. For them, patient response is absolutely individual and everything. They do believe that KPIs are extra money spent on useless graphs and pretty dashboards. Most of the clinicians don't have time for KPIs. They believe that the same time invested in marketing will give them better revenue. And the gut feel is that it's a gimmick by software companies to trap doctors. So today I have an Herculean task of convincing the non-believers as to what is the importance of KPI, why do we actually need them, what can we track practically at minimum, and how to go about monitoring and tracking KPI on regular basis, and show what are the available tools in the market for tracking KPIs. And lastly, a take-home message to muse over. So let us first revise KPIs through some quick notes. Key performance indicators, by definition, are measurable values that indicate how effectively a unit is achieving its key objectives. So remember the terms measurable value and key objective. So for any IVF clinic or unit, what is the single most important objective? We all would agree that it is the take-home baby rate. However, take-home baby rate is very difficult. It's nearly impossible to track. This is because of the kind of practice that most of us have, where the patient does not deliver with us. And even if they do, the time frame between the start of a treatment to the delivery is usually a very long time frame, and it is really very difficult to track this KPI. So let us stick to something which is achievable. So the next important KPI is a clinical pregnancy rate. It is difficult, but it is not impossible to measure. And this is what will define the performance of an IVF clinic. Now, let us reverse engineer to see what do you actually need for a successful IVF pregnancy. You need a good quality ovum, good quality sperm, good quality embryo, good quality endometrium, a good embryo transfer, and a good luteal phase support. So these are all the factors which impact the clinical pregnancy rate. If done right, then it should give you a clinical pregnancy. All of these factors can be divided into two sides, if I must use the term. One is the clinical side and the other is the IVF embryology side. So the factors contributing to clinical KPIs would be the quality of the ovum, quality of sperm, quality of endometrial preparation, and the quality of luteal phase support. Similarly, the factors which contribute to an IVF Lab KPI would be quality of sperm prepared, the fertilization technique used and fertilization of ovum, embryo development, quality of vitrification and warming, quality of the embryo transfer, and the quality of biopsy. We don't need to reinvent the wheel by trying to give a definition to all these KPIs. They are already predefined, and let us see how these KPIs are defined and what kind of benchmark and competency values are being followed worldwide. So first, let us go through some key terms whenever we talk about KPIs. These are a few key terms which will always be used and we should know what they mean. So, reference population, competency value, and benchmark values. These are the terms which will be used when we talk about KPI definitions. So, what is a reference population? So, we all would agree that there is no point in panicking over a failed blastulation of a 41-year-old female with just 2 oocytes retrieved. Neither should you go over the moon if you have a donor cycle where the donor was 22-year-old female and the sperms were healthy and you got a blastulation of 85%. And it could be a today's blast like Instagram moment, but it definitely doesn't tell much about what's happening in your IVF lab. So worldwide, all the important stakeholders, they defined a set of reference population and said that the KPIs matter and should be tracked for female aged less than 40 years, where you are using own ejaculated sperm, no TISA, TESI or sperm donor, and you should be calculating only when you are doing self cycles, no donor oocyte cycles, and no PGT cycles. They again define two terms called competency value and the benchmark value. Competency value is a minimum ability of doing something, whereas benchmark is the best level of expected performance. It actually serves as a target that you should look upon to. So whenever you open an IVF lab and you do your cycles, competency value is the minimum percentage value that you should be targeting to achieve, and that is the minimum that you should be performing at. Whereas benchmark is something that you would be looking up to. So any fine-tuned, well-oiled IVF clinic will definitely be close to the benchmark levels. Now, clinical KPIs. What does the world say about the clinical KPIs? So my world is unfortunately limited to ESHRE. So the European societies have done a very good job at defining the clinical KPIs. So whenever you talk about clinical KPIs, Maribor consensus is the one that you should be reading into. So there was this consensus meeting which took place in May 2021, because I think it was only during the lockdown of COVID that clinicians had time enough to concentrate on the KPIs. The performance indicators for clinical practice were discussed, and they came out with 2 performance indicators for ovarian stimulation, 2 for tracking ovarian response, and 2 performance indicators for embryo transfer. All these 6 PIs need to be calculated every 6 months or 100 cycles, whichever occurs first. Now, what are these 6 PIs? So you have cycle cancellation before OPU. It was further subdivided into a different competency and benchmark values for normal, poor, and high responders. We had complication rate after OPU, rate of moderate to severe OHSS, clinical pregnancy rate, proportion of M2 at ICSI, and multiple pregnancy rate. Too many terms to digest when you look at it for the first time. However, in our clinical practice, these two are the most important one. How actually the multiple pregnancy rate is important, but since most of the clinics in India still do not follow a single embryo transfer, the clinical pregnancy rate and proportion of M2 at ICSI is, these are the two most important KPIs that one should be looking at from the clinical side. Clinicians need to understand that proportion of M2 at ICSI is the entry point at the IVF lab. So until you have the proportion of M2 at ICSI at least a competency level and ideally at a benchmark level, the IVF lab KPIs will have no meaning. So how do you calculate M2 at ICSI? So it is a percentage. So the formula is simple. You have the number of M2 over the number of OCCs. So if you had 10 OCCs and 7 M2s, then your M2 at ICSI would be 70%, whereas if you had 8 M2s, it would be an 80%. The competency value of M2 at ICSI is 74%. So if you are consistently giving 80% or more of M2, then you are doing good. Clinical pregnancy rate is defined as the number of gestational sacs seen on ultrasound over the number of ETs. So if you did 10 ETs for a month and you tracked them to find gestational sacs on the ultrasound and you found 5 of them resulted in gestational sacs, then the clinical pregnancy rate would be 50%. Now, what does the world say about IVF lab KPIs? Now, Vienna consensus is the one which we need to follow when we talk about IVF lab KPIs. The Vienna consensus occurred 4 years before the Maribor consensus in June 2017, and they defined 2 reference indicators, 5 performance indicators, and 12 key performance indicators. And the KPIs need to be calculated every month or 30 cycles, whichever occurred first. So let us see what these 12 performance indicators are. So Vienna consensus defines ICSI damage rate, failed fertilization rate, IVF normal fertilization rate, cleavage rate, ICSI normal fertilization rate, day 2 embryo development rate. Actually quite a mouthful. So are all of these important? Is it practical to track all of these? Well, very honestly, if we talk about any IVF clinic, I think among these, the most important which we usually track are the fertilization rate, whether it be ICSI or IVF. But since most of us do ICSI most of the times, it makes sense to calculate the ICSI normal fertilization rate, which should have a competency value of 65% or more. Now going to the next set of KPIs, we have day 3 embryo development rate, blast survival rate, blast development rate, implantation rate, successful biopsy rate, implantation rate for blastocyst stage transfer, and so on. So of these set of 6, I think we all would agree that what is most important for us as embryologists is the blast development rate and the implantation rate at a blastocyst stage, considering that most of us do a blastocyst stage transfer. And the competency value for a blastocyst development rate is a 40%, and that for implantation rate at a blastocyst stage is greater than 35%. Now let us see what is the formula for calculating ICSI normal fertilization rate. It is simple. It is the number of 2p and 2 polar body over the number of M2 injected. The blastocyst development rate is the number of blast on day 5 over the number of normally fertilized oocytes on day 1. By normally we mean no rescue ICSI and all. Implantation rate is the number of sac on ultrasound over the number of blastocysts transferred. So let us summarize what we looked into so far. We discussed that clinical pregnancy rate is the most important KPI that makes sense to be tracked for a IVF clinic. We segregated the KPIs into the clinical KPIs and the IVF Lab KPIs. On the clinical side, we agreed that M2 at ICSI and clinical pregnancy rate are the two most important KPIs that make sense to be tracked and monitored. Whereas for the IVF Lab, the KPIs which are important for us are fertilization rate, the blastocyst development rate, and the implantation rate at a blastocyst stage. Now that we have established what needs to be calculated, what we need to understand is what will tracking these KPIs lead to? How can they help us in our day-to-day practice? For that, we'll have to get back to our statistics. So this is a control chart, and you have a mean, you have control limits, and you have warning limit. The warning limit is a plus or minus 2 standard deviation, and the control limit is plus or minus of 3 standard deviations. So standard deviation is a formula, and it's very easy to calculate a standard deviation by using Excel. So what do actually the tracking of KPI lead to? So when you actually track these KPI month on month, you can see that on the x-axis at the bottom, you have been tracking a particular KPI. For example, let's say you are tracking blastulation rate, and you see the values from month on month, from the first month to almost 2 years worth of data on this control chart. When you track them month on month, this kind of a graphical representation is very easy to follow as compared to, for example, 500 IVF cycles on a spreadsheet. Here you can see that in the month of May, which was the 5th month, you see that the blastulation rate shows a sudden dip. So that is an evolving problem. Now, when you track it further, you identify the problem because it has gone beyond the 3 standard deviation, which is your control limit, and you identify the problem to be probably a percentage mix on your tri-gas cylinder, and you solved it, and then you see that you are back again on track. The value of control charting comes when you are looking at a trend. So the next year, in the month of probably April or March, when you see that there is a fluctuation in blastocyst development rate, you know that it is an evolving problem. And at that moment of time, without even going beyond your control limit, you know what the resolution is, because when it happened the last time, you identified the problem and you solved it. So the value of control chart comes when you do a trend analysis and you know what needs to be fixed even without it going beyond your control limits. Now, what happens when you're consistently doing good? When you're consistently outperforming for 3 or more instances, you know that your system has matured. You are a well-oiled machine, and now it is time to redefine your control limit. So the question is, do you need to monitor all the KPIs all the time? If you are an IVF clinic which has just started, it probably makes sense to measure the baseline value of all the KPIs unless you have reached an optimized state. But once you have reached this optimized state of a competency value of clinical pregnancy rate, it probably makes sense to continue measuring at least these 5 KPIs, which are M2 at ICSI, fertilization rate, usable blastocyst rate, implantation rate, and clinical pregnancy rate throughout. But like always, change is inevitable. So there are many changes that will occur in your practice. Some of the changes and events would be things that you cannot control, while some of the changes will be ones that you can control. So changes that you cannot control are seasonal changes, extreme temperature, humidity, batch of a drug or a media, or a patient lot. So whenever there are changes that are beyond your control, it makes sense to continue measuring these 5 KPIs at the least. However, if you want to make any changes deliberately or or have changes that you can control, are in your control, like for example, you want to change your drug company for stimulation or trigger, or you want to change or try a different vitrification media, or there has been a change or an impending change of an embryologist or a clinician, then at that point of time it probably makes sense to track a few extra KPIs. For example, if you have to change the stimulation drug, apart from the 5 KPIs that we just saw, it probably makes sense to also track cycle cancellation rate, which is defined as number of cycles cancelled before OPU over the number of stimulation cycles started, as well as the rate of cycles with moderate to severe OHSS, which are number of cycles with moderate or severe OHSS over the number of cycles started. If there has been a new clinician who has joined your practice, it probably makes sense to calculate these 3 KPIs apart from the ones that you will be calculating regularly. And these would be cycle cancellation rate, rate of cycle with moderate to severe OHSS, and if this clinician is also performing OPUs, then complication rate after OPU is also an important KPI that needs to be tracked. And these additional KPIs should be tracked until you have reached a particular competency level and you are comfortable and with the new adjustments which were just made. At the
Or when
IVF
I am
Lab
not
side,
doing good.
if there has been a change in
Right?
a heating plate, for example, then you would at least need to calculate the cleavage rate and the day 3 embryo development rate. If there has been a change in an embryologist, then for a few months until you are back to track, you should.
So, what are the benefits of measuring KPIs? Well, change is inevitable, but KPIs give you the confidence to adapt to a change. So, changes in clinical practice, like change in stimulation drug, change in stimulation protocol, or the length of the stimulation, changes in the trigger drug, changes in clinician, all of this can be confidently and smoothly be achieved if you are tracking the KPIs before and after the change. Similarly, what can KPIs help you catch in the IVF lab, or what can KPIs help you adapt to? So, things like change in CO2 concentration, change in temperature, change in culture media, change in vitrification or warming, protocol or the batch or company, change in air quality, change in disposables, change in lab SOP, or change in embryologist. KPIs can help you achieve this change or track and catch any change if you're tracking them on regular basis. Now the question is, how do you measure these KPIs, the practical KPIs that we spoke about? What tools can you use or should you use to measure them? Well, for tracking KPIs and analyzing them, you have kind of 3 options available in the market as of today. If you want to go organic, you can use an Excel spreadsheet. It is pretty effective, cost effective, and it is an in-house tool. You can make use of HIS or EMR softwares with dashboarding facility. They do come with a steep learning curve if you have novices handling the system. The data entry is time consuming and it is a bit costlier as compared to organic tools. However, they do give you a lot of nice features that you could use for tracking your KPIs. And we have AI based web products which we will get into. We also have an option of choosing an AI based web product, and we will get into it in a short while. Let us see how we can use an Excel spreadsheet for tracking KPIs.
So I prepared a mock Excel spreadsheet with some mock 100 patient worth data, and I entered the expected number of follicles, the OCCs, M2, 2PN, 2 polar bodies, and the usable blastocyst, and I mocked up this data. Now, calculating M2 at ICSI should be pretty simple. It should be the column M2 divided by the number of OCCs, right? So let us see how we have done in our actual sample spreadsheet. So you can see that G, the column G is M2 and the column F is OCCs. So proportion of M2 at ICSI is simply G2 over F2 and giving a percentage to it. Now, this itself should be enough to know whether you are performing at par or not. But giving a visual indicator makes more sense depending on the competency and benchmark values. So let us see how we can do that. So what we did was we will give a visual indicator to the proportion of M2 at ICSI. So first we populated this entire row with the same data of M2 at ICSI. So it is just applying a formula and dragging it to all the cells. Now we will try to give a conditional formatting rule and apply some visual indicators, where the visual indicator is going to give you a certain indicator if you are within a range, and it will give you another indicator if you are outside the range. So we can say that let us give a benchmark value of 0.8, and every time I'm doing better than 0.8, then I will give a visual indicator of a green tick. When I'm between 0.8 and the competency value of say 0.7, I would be giving an exclamation, and whenever I am under 0.7, it would be a red flag for me. And when I apply this, I can see a visual indicator which is much easier than reading through the numbers. So the M2 at ICSI indicator gives me pretty much when I am above my benchmark value or within the benchmark range. So you can apply the similar kind of formula for calculating fertilization rate or blast rate, and as you can see, you can apply a different kind of a visual indicator for fertilization rate as well as the usable blast rate. So you can use whatever icon that suits you to calculate the same. So this is how the spreadsheet looks like. So far so good, but now it is kind of difficult to track data, rows and rows of hundreds of patient worth of data. So it kind of makes sense to make a control chart out of it. So for control charting, Excel again gives you, many features and formulas for calculating a control chart. Let us see how do you do that for this spreadsheet data. So as you can see, you have, proportion of M2 at ICSI for trait and blast rate. Let us say we want to create a control chart now for M2 at ICSI. For that, you need to calculate the arithmetic mean, which is the mean of this entire proportion of M2 at ICSI column. And you need to apply a formula to calculate the standard deviation for this particular sample size. And then you can automatically get this control chart populated. Let us see if this is live. If we change the proportion of M2 for this particular column from 10 to say 1, see, you can see the chart is live. So whenever you make a change here, it gets reflected on your control chart. So yes, you can use Excel spreadsheet. If you have fair enough knowledge of Excel spreadsheets, you can definitely use them for control charting and tracking your KPIs. There are many pros and cons of using a spreadsheet for monitoring your KPIs. The most important disadvantage is that spreadsheet kind of becomes cumbersome when the amount of data is more. So let's see what other options you have available. Among the other options, you have softwares which are EMR or HIS softwares which are specifically these days catered to an IVF industry. You do have a bunch of them available that you can try. The only disadvantage with them is that they have a steep learning curve because you have multiple parties who will be entering data to this software. So the learning curve is a bit steep. But if you compare it with entering data on a spreadsheet, I think this is easier. And also it is time consuming at times. So when we talk about these softwares, all the softwares that you could use for KPI analysis give you nice dashboards. It is like a one-click dashboard wherein you can see your all your KPIs at at a dispense of one click. So data entry to these softwares have to be done on regular basis, and once you keep on entering data, then you can also see at any point of time at your wish where you stand in your KPIs. These softwares typically have a one-time installation cost, and which includes the setup and custom reporting and data migration. The one-time installation cost could be anywhere between 2 lakhs to 12 lakhs, that is 200,000 to 120,000. This wide range in the pricing is because some of them have are part of huge enterprise level hospital management systems. Apart from the one-time installation cost, they also have an ongoing annual maintenance charge. It could be up to from 50,000 to 200,000. These days, I have also seen there are many softwares available which also offer a monthly subscription charge, because many smaller setups find it difficult to pay a large amount of money as a one-time installation cost. And the annual subscription or monthly charge for such softwares also are amount to the close to 20 to 30,000 per month. Now, when we talk about tools which are available for tracking KPIs, we also need to talk about AI-based KPI tracking solutions. These solutions, apart from the regular real-time KPI tracking, they also give you a predictive analytics. By predictive analytics, you mean use of historical data to predict the future data. A small example could be, prediction of blastulation. Such softwares will take an input of oocyte images and give you a prediction of blastulation. The customizable dashboard and monitoring of KPI is a feature which is available in all of these products. And the AI-based products are also automated for data collection. Simple example could be, instead of you having to enter what were the M2s for OCCs, if such products are integrated with the microscope cameras, they can automatically detect the M2s and Blastocyst and so on. These products also give you an alert and notification when KPIs are out of control limit. At this point of time, it does seem that AI-based products or softwares that help us monitor and track KPI have a cost associated with it, for which IVF clinics find it difficult to, make it a part of their daily practice. But I'm very hopeful that in near future, IVF practitioners will find all of these products very useful, and they will make it an integral part of our IVF practice. So this brings us to the end of our session. Some quick KPI quotes. KPIs are like marriage. You have to work at them every day to make them successful. KPIs are like gym membership. If you don't use them, they are just a waste of money. And lastly, KPIs are like a diet. Everyone knows you need them, but not everyone sticks to them. Thank you so much for your time and patience. I'm Doel Bose, and you can find me at Embryology. We offer tailor-made courses for IVF clinicians and embryologists. Thank you. And that is me, just in case you want to associate a face with the voice.